Welcome to the Biochar Show. I'm your host, Megan K. Lees. Today we're diving into the power of biochar to drive sustainability and regenerative solutions around the world. I'm thrilled to be joined by Lucia Brusegan. Lucia is the chair of the board at the International Biochar Initiative and managing director at Starter. With more than 30 years of experience in sustainable development, she's played a key role in bringing biochar solutions to communities across Africa and beyond. From identifying waste biomass streams to implementing pyrolysis technology and improving soil health, Lucia's work is where science meets real-world impact. We'll be talking about her journey, the challenges she faced, and her vision for the future of biochar. Lucia, welcome to the Biochar Show.
Thank you very much, Megan.
How are things? How is Venice, Italy?
How is Venice, Italy? It's fantastic. I'd invite you to join us here. It's nice weather, nice people, and maybe too many tourists sometimes, but it's a nice place. It's unique in the world, in the globe.
It is a pretty magical place, I will say. So thank you for being on the show and taking the time to come chat with the audience and let me learn a little bit more about yourself and your work in the whole biochar world. So you've spent 30 years working in sustainable development. What first drew you to biochar, and I guess what keeps you passionate about it?
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. This is a very interesting question, and I could tell a very long story about that. It was 2007 when I started thinking about biochar as an opportunity. We were working with a team of scientists in a project called Carbomark, and we were investigating in Italy the idea of local carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets. And in order to deliver locally all the ecosystem services that storing carbon take. It was mainly now nature-based solutions. And at some point, we met this article from Johannes Lehmann, A Handful of Carbon. And that was the spark that lit us. And at that time, biochar was not real an option. I mean, it was just studied by a small community of dreamers and pioneers. So there was not that much of knowledge around that. And so these early adopters laid the ground for what we see now. So we started to say, why don't we try to do something and to learn something out of this biochar? And so we started by developing a project in the Global South because we intended to use biochar as for acidic soil, which basically at that time it was clear that biochar was good for acidic soils. So everything started there. And now, I mean, I'm still doing that, and I'm passionate because I've experienced how the life of people can change when they introduce biochar into their farming systems. Even small-scale farmers, poor people with low availability to resources, they can make a huge difference by adopting biochar. And that's why I'm still there.
I love it. That's a great answer. So as the chair of the board of IBI, what are your key priorities for the organization right now?
That's a good question. I think times are changing so fast for biochar in the global as a global solution. We have seen since 4 or 5 years so far a huge interest around biochar, especially from big corporations and project developers. There are a lot of investment, so everything has changed since I initially started my interest on biochar. So as IBI, we have adopted a new strategic plan a few months ago, and our mission is to empower communities and inspire industries to integrate biochar-based solutions towards a healthier planet, ecosystems, and economies, meaning that whatever we do to support, expand biochar to the maximum extent that we can. So it's educating people, inspiring industries, decarbonizing industry, using biochar not only for soils, but also for other ecosystem services in materials, for instance, in asphalt, in concrete, and also to generate carbon credits. That's something we need to push as much as we can in order biochar to scale up and to become a big opportunity to decarbonize our planet, basically.
And speaking of other parts of our planet, your work in Africa has been very groundbreaking. Can you share maybe a specific project that has had a major impact for you or on the community there?
Yes, I can, and I'm happy to do that. Since 2017-18, involved in deploying, introducing biochar systems in Burundi. Burundi is a very small landlocked country in Central Africa. It's in the Great Lakes region, and it's one of the poorest countries in the world. It's really a small country, but the people there lives with less than $2 per day, meaning that they're super poor. And so we were asked, it was not by chance, we have not decided to go there. We were asked to do that from the World Bank, just to deliver a proof of concept around introducing biochar system in a context where resources are really limited. Burundi is such a poor country that we had to think about technological options. That could be deployed in that specific context. So we have developed this clean cooking stove design, which is called ELSA. And ELSA is a tillad gasifier that process waste biomass that is locally available. We use palm oil kernels and corn cobs and wood chips that are locally available. People, the families, the women can cook, and at the same time, while cooking, they can produce the biochar that they can apply in their backyards, basically. So, this project was introducing a relatively new concept that integrates energy use and agricultural productivity. So we started by doing a pilot, and then we have seen that could work. We were financed again by the European Union, and we moved in different communities. And now biochar is a solution that the farmers, smallholder farmers, consider in their daily practice. Think about farmers that don't have access to fertilizers, so that they are so poor that they cannot have the appropriate agronomic inputs to their soils. Applying the biochar made a huge difference to the productivity of their soils. So when they have experienced that the biochar application was important to produce more food, then they adopted also the stove. So biochar was a very good strategy to introduce also a clean cooking solution to the families. Since 2018, we've been working there, and now 2 years ago, I decided to commit myself a little bit more to fulfill the biochar potential in Burundi as much as it can. So we decided to set up a startup to produce clean cooking stoves in Bujumbura. And now this activity is in the process to start, and to expand our job in the field involving other communities and to work with the coffee sector. Now we are going to the production not only of biochar and the application of biochar, but the generation of carbon credits from the stove with these communities, taking benefits, also economic benefits. So expanding the income of smallholder in these poor communities. So that's my commitment and everything. And I decided to commit at this level after I've visited the communities we were working during the first project. We had to stop working in the field at some point because of COVID. And so we could not stay there and work with the farmers. We cannot stay there teaching them, applying the biochar and so on. But they were still doing that. When I could when I came back to visit Burundi after COVID, it was my first trip after 1 year and a half. It was really tough. And I say, I want to go and visit the communities and see what's happening there, if they're still applying biochar using the stove. I met the farmers and the women, and they were saying, oh, yes, we are using the stove, we are applying the biochar and so on. But I was not really sure that they were really doing that. You know, sometimes people tell you what they think you want them to tell you. So I say, okay, listen, take me to the field. I want to see the biochar in the soil. So I didn't trust them, basically. And that was a really powerful experience because they took me up hills. We used tracks because it's mountain, so we had to walk on tracks. And along the way, there were little houses of the villagers. And at some point, they started coming out of their houses and just they were spotting me. They understood that I was the person that was working on biochar, and they started shouting at me, biochar, biochar, and that was so powerful. Yes, and the children came, and I was like, oh my God, this is really, I mean, it was really powerful for me to make me understand that our job was meaningful to the community. And so I went to the field where they were applying biochar. It was a new plot where we had not worked before, and I could spot the biochar in the soil. So it was true, and I say this is meaningful, so it's worth to make an investment with these people. When you see that biochar can change lives of people, then it's really powerful.
What a good feeling for you. My gosh, I would have. That's pretty impressive. They associate you with doing good for their community, and especially like you said, a year and a half later, during with COVID and stuff. I think they really believed in biochar, in what you were telling them, and I think that's really. I mean, that tells a lot about biochar and sustainability, and trusting the process.
Yes, yes. It's also related to the fact that we were there working with them. There was an agronomist staying there for months, making the biochar application, training the farmers to apply the biochar. And then when there was the crop yield, the season to get the beans or the maize, there was an agronomist staying there doing all on-farm trials with the farmers, and they were applying biochar. And then after the cropping season, he was there just waiting the production, and they realized that they got so many more beans, so many more maize things. And so it was so powerful. So the farmers understood, okay, just applying this stupid thing called biochar, I can get more food, and I can take my food to the market and then sell it and get more income. So that was a big driver for the adoption of biochar. And what we did after that, we used the farmers that learned how to apply the biochar to teach to their neighbors. So we started a kind of peer-to-peer experience where the neighbors learned from the other farmers. So it was not me, not us doing the job. It was them doing the job and teaching the others. It takes time, but it's really powerful to introduce the technology.
I think you're right. It definitely is. This whole thing is word of mouth, which is, sort of the start of this podcast for a reason, because so many people don't know what this is. And it's not necessarily just like, poorer places, but, places where like Canada or the United States, like certain places have fires or different things. It's so beneficial for so many things, like so many different reasons. And I think it's really powerful, especially for you. I mean, that's just such a great feeling, and a great feeling for that community as well. So on that note, what would you say some of the biggest challenges implementing biochar systems in resource limited regions like the Central Africa?
Well, yeah, there are challenges that are not kind of normal in our daily lives. But I would say that everything starts from the biomass. So whatever region, whatever geography you are working, everything starts from biomass. So just study the biomass that you have around and look for opportunities. And that's the first important part of whatever biochar system you will introduce. So is this biomass in quality, available in the right quality, in the right quantity? How much thing do you have there? Is it wet? Is it not wet? What is the shape of this biomass? How are roads around you? Just the logistic, how the logistic can be arranged. It might be the case that in some geographies you have interesting amounts of biomass, but that is scattered around the landscape. Introducing a plant processing unit doesn't make much sense. It's better to think about small scale devices that can capture the energy that is in that biomass and produce the biochar that you need. And maybe in small farming systems, you don't need that much amount, and also a stove is useful. Of course, if you have bigger amounts of biomass, then makes more sense to think about other scale of technologies to produce your biochar. But so we need all sort of technology. Then, of course, if you work in resource limited countries, you have to consider, for instance, the logistic, the roads. Maybe the roads are not as good as you think they are, or the energy that is not available, not always available. And this means that, for instance, you cannot have access to raw materials that you need to build your technology. Even a small stove need some metal, or stainless steel would be better. But for instance, in Burundi, you don't find it. So you need to be flexible and to be able to introduce a system, whatever landscape you are working in, and capture the opportunities that you have in that specific landscape. So maybe a plant unit is not feasible because you cannot have kind of a lot of engineering work fixing problems because you don't have access to a lot of things that you need and that are normally available in Italy or in Canada or in the US. But there, a small stove can be fixed or produced with local manpower, local tools, even just with a hammer and a scissor for metal, they can produce a stove. And that's important because this means that they can produce their own stoves. That's what we are doing now. We are launching these locally produced stoves. So we are trying to produce a device which is really simple to be produced so that we don't need to buy anything from the outside. We can source everything there, from manpower to raw materials, whatever is there. So there are challenges, but wherever you go, you can find people that can fold metal, cut it with very simple tool, and it is feasible there. So that's the kind of challenges that I see. So for sure, it's different, but it's feasible.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So you've worked with institutions like the EU and World Bank. How important are, now we're going to large scale funding, like how important are large scale funding and policy support in advancing the biochar initiative?
It's very important and it's not easy. My experience is that when you tell the story about how biochar and the biochar system can change the lives of people, everybody likes it. So they are all, oh, that's cool, that's smart, and so on. But at some point, well, when you introduce a biochar system, you have to consider different ecosystems and services that it delivers. It's biochar, so it's soil, especially in these geographies. It's energy, because you recover energy for cooking, you recover the heat for cooking, but it's also socio-economic development. It's also women, gender, because women are responsible for collecting the fuel and cooking. So there is a huge gender perspective that is integrated into the clean cooking story. But when you reach them and you say, listen, we have this option, they like this idea that you can deliver a lot of benefits. But at some point, when it turns to, okay, now support this exercise, financially support this exercise, they say, oh, we are energy, so we can finance you only if you have the most performative stove ever. which may not be the case because in these geographies, a small stove locally built is not the most efficient, maybe, but it's good because it's locally produced. So sometimes it's difficult to make them thinking broader, in a broader way, to be able to say, okay, even if I'm energy, I support this technology because it delivers benefits in different areas. So I'm interested also in gaining that. Maybe the private sector is more willing to support this because they see the social thing that is behind that, and they see a value in this. I think maybe ESG can capture more this aspect of this system of biochar around the introduction of clean cooking stoves.
And would you say that's kind of one of the misconceptions of biochar? Like, I feel like sometimes there are misconceptions. Would you say that's one of them?
Yeah, misconception. Well, if I assume the end user's perspective, so let's think about smallholder farmers in rural context in the global south. There is a big thing with charcoal. It's hard to make them understand that biochar is not charcoal. The first difference is that charcoal is used to produce energy, while biochar is used to produce a lot of other different things, but not energy, definitely. So that's something they know charcoal because they have been using charcoal since ever to produce to cook, to produce their fuel. And this is a big issue in the global south because one of the main reasons for the deforestation is the use of charcoal. Charcoal is made from wood. So they go into the forest, they cut the trees, and they use these trees, and they produce the charcoal in these ovens. It's interesting to know, but I mean, it's unsustainable, completely unsustainable. So that's a challenge because people need to understand, farmers and women needs to understand that there are other feedstock that can be used, waste biomass that they can find around their place. Palm oil kernel shells are perfect to be processed in a stove. They can get the fuel for cooking and the biochar, and they can use that biochar into their crops and get a lot of benefits out of that. And that's a different narrative, a different experience that they have to get. They need to be exposed to this, to see the values of that. And then when they understand, they are available to adopt the technology.
And so because you work with, low tech in Central Africa and, high tech, could you talk about the difference maybe between innovation and physicality in biochar adoption? Like maybe Italy versus Central Africa, like you were saying, just in Canada and versus Italy, we have the technology, whereas countries that don't have quite what we have still manage to be sustainable with what you're saying with the stove and using the resources that they have. I mean, it obviously has an advantage of high tech, but I think people need to understand too that in low tech environments, it's just as effective.
Well, let's discuss about what innovation is first, because I think we need to agree on this idea of innovation. Something that can innovate here cannot be that innovative, maybe in your place or in other geographies. Something that is innovative in Burundi for sure is not innovative here. So innovation is a relative concept, and it relies very strictly to the local environment, local socioeconomic development, local thing. So it's very specific, very related to the place. So I can innovate. I'm sure I'm doing innovation in Burundi, but the same thing that I'm doing in Burundi, I would never do that here or in Canada. This said, what it is feasible here in Europe or in North America, it's completely different concept. We do have capacity to process bigger amounts of waste biomass streams. We do have the technologies. There are bigger plants that are available. The idea of the biochar system is not difficult. What it is difficult is to frame it appropriately in the given setting that you want to introduce it. That's difficult because you need to understand your biomass, You need to have the appropriate technology to process that biomass, and you need to produce the biochar that you need to produce for the intended use. Right now, we don't talk about one single biochar. What we have understood a long time is that we can get as many biochars as many biomass sources we have and technologies. So we need to get the right biochar, the best possible biochar for the intended use that we want to have. If our aim is to produce, for instance, a highly carbon content biochar, then we know that we need to process woody residues, but they have some characteristics, and the biochar that we can get maybe is not the best biochar for some specific uses, and so on. So I think this kind of conversation is for Europe, for the US, for Australia, maybe for some areas in East Asia. For the global South, I mean, also artisanal technology can make a huge difference and can innovate a lot and can take all the benefits of biochar to the communities or to the societies.
And I feel with all of that, I would assume collaboration is key to this progress. Like, are there partnerships, whether it's researchers, policymakers, or maybe even local communities, would you say have, I guess, the most impact on your work?
Well, you need science. Science is the starting point for everything, and you need to work with local community to root the technology, and because they are the end users. But more than end users, I would say they are the end choosers. They choose the technology, they choose to apply the biochar, they choose to produce their own biochar, at least for the stoves, of course. When we move to more industrial size plant, it's maybe different because then it has a completely different business model. Now we know that the biochar the carbon credits that are generated from big industries are driving the industry right now. And of course, their business model needs also to integrate also working with the communities, partnering with local people, because they have to apply the biochar into the soil. Otherwise, it's not possible to generate the credits, the carbon credits, because the biochar needs to be stored. It doesn't need to stay there in piles, maybe, or with the risk of fires, for instance. It needs to stay down in the soil, into the soil. So that's something that is clear. Yeah, so local partnership with the local people, with the project developers, implementers, end users, research, that is key. And also institutions. It's important to have to involve institutions because they are so powerful in expanding the technology uptake. For instance, in Burundi, they have collines. Collines are hills, basically, where they have a chief of colline. It's a kind of mayor of colline, and they have a local agronomist, which is an official guy supporting, doing extension activities towards the farmers. So it's important that they work with us to introduce the technology with all the farmers of the colline. So I think the partnership is key to introduce a system and to take the best out of the biochar system to the local communities.
So looking ahead, let's say 5 to 10 years, where do you think the biggest opportunities for biochar will be?
What do you mean with biggest opportunities?
Well, I guess I'm trying to see if I can word this a different way. Maybe, is it beneficial? Like, I guess with Central Africa, what is your hopes with that part that you've built the stoves and the biochar? Is it to continue throughout that community, or to branch out further than Central Africa in that sense? Or are you hoping it's going to be this worldwide phenomenon that people really latch onto, and it's not just this like misconception that, like you said, it's not charcoal?
Well, there is a huge potential around biochar everywhere. I see that. And this is very personal because my commitment is towards the global south, especially in Burundi. My wish, and I'm committed to that, is that in 10 years there is a thriving industry around biochar, maybe with using artisanal technology, so stoves and contikis or small kilns, capturing all the biomass opportunities that are there. There is a huge potential, maybe not in Burundi, but in the neighboring countries. DRC, for instance, it's the second largest forest is there, I mean, after Amazon. So they have a lot of opportunities to introduce and to process and to substitute charcoal with the systems around biochar to cook. And that's really a big opportunity. So I'd love this local production, local stove production to become a reality. And I'm dreaming of having a facility there, a hub for ELSA stove production there, and selling the stove, distributing the stove, introducing the system to as many communities as possible. Especially in the rural areas where they can use and process locally available waste biomass streams. There is waste biomass. It depends on the location. Burundi is a specific country where they have hills. So if you go up hills, they can have some biomass. If you go down hills or in the valleys, they have a completely different soils. And so it needs to be tailored to the different situation. But I'd love to see that this is scaling countrywide and also in the region.
Okay, well, speaking of your home country of Italy, how is biochar being adopted there? Like, what are some unique opportunities or challenges that you see maybe for implementation there?
Well, Italy is not on the forefront of biochar. We do have, yeah, that's the reality. That's the picture. We do have a very nice biochar community. It is a small community, but we don't have an industry. I wouldn't say we have an industry. It's research, mainly research and application, but not in the kind of real economy. So there is a space for improvement in Italy for sure. While in Europe, there is an industry and it's kind of very important industry, mainly on German countries, and they are doing really a good job. I'd love also that my country could benefit out of that. Maybe as a follower, I'm not kind of interested in being leader in Italy, but I hope that Italy will benefit from biochar because I see a lot of opportunities.
Lucia, this has been a really informative, amazing conversation. I thank you so much for joining all the way from Venice, Italy. For those of our listeners that want to know more about your work, what's the best place for them to go to get a little more research on you, on IBI, on your company?
Okay. IBI, we do have a website which is very rich and populated, especially if you decide to become a member, which I would recommend. You will join many opportunities, informative. As IBI, we do have a monthly newsletter, which is very nice because it summarizes all the major research papers that are produced in that month. So it's very updated. As for my job, I mean, you can contact me directly via email. There is a video in YouTube on Burundi. It's a 7 minutes video that we produced on the first pilot project that we organized in Burundi with the World Bank. So since then, we have been working a little bit more. So we have many other things to say. But that's interesting because it offers the opportunity to see why it is important to think also about small scale devices and low tech things to introduce the biochar because there it makes sense. Here it doesn't make any sense to use a kind of stove and to get the biochar. It's just for fun. I mean, you can do it, but you enjoy it, but it's not. But yeah, there it's really important.
Well, thank you so much to everyone that tuned in and listening. One way to show support for the show is by subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Don't forget to rate and review because 5-star reviews go a long way. It really helps others find the show and share this episode with someone who'd find it valuable. A big thank you to our listeners and to the wonderful Lucia. We'll see you next time on the Biochar. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Megan. You are
Thank
super.
you.